Montana Territory. August 1879, the sun was a cruel thing in the high plains, burning down on the dry earth without mercy, when Leora Hensley dropped to her knees on the side of the trail, dust caking her lips and her stomach clawing at itself with hunger. She had not eaten in 3 days. Her dress, once a soft blue, was torn at the hem and stained with sweat and trail dust. Her boots, too big, borrowed from a kind woman back in Miles City, were cracked at the soles. She had walked for hours since dawn, following wagon ruts west, hoping for anyone who might stop, but no one had. Not since the wagon left her behind. Her stepfather had said there was no room, said her mother's death made her someone else's burden. He had 2 sons of his own and no patience left for the girl who cried too loud at night. They had driven off without looking back while she stood beside the fire, holding her mother's comb in one hand and nothing in the other. Now she was starving in the dust with nothing but bad memories and cracked lips. A horse's hooves broke the silence. She blinked against the sun. A man approached on horseback, tall in the saddle, his face shaded by a wide-brimmed hat. He wore a worn canvas duster and a revolver at his hip, reins loose in one hand. He slowed when he saw her, then stopped altogether. "You alive?" he asked, voice rough but not unkind. Leora tried to speak, but no sound came out. Her tongue was too dry. She nodded instead, just barely. The cowboy swung down from the saddle with a practiced ease, boots hitting the dirt beside her. He knelt, pulling a canteen from his saddlebag and holding it to her lips. "Easy," he said. "Just a sip." The water hit her tongue and she nearly wept. It tasted like life. She drank slowly, breathing through her nose, then leaned back and looked up at him. His eyes were a deep gray, steady. Jawline sharp, sun-kissed skin. Maybe 30, maybe a little older. He smelled like leather and dust and horse. "What's your name?" he asked. "Leora," she whispered. "Leora Hensley." He nodded once. "Zane Thatcher." He glanced at the trail, then back at her. "You alone out here?" She nodded. "My stepfather left me 3 days ago. Said I was no use." Zane's jaw tightened. He looked away for a second, then stood and offered his hand. "You are not staying out here another hour," he said. "Come on. I got food and coffee back at camp. You will eat tonight. You will rest." She stared at his hand, unsure if she could trust it. But her stomach twisted again, and his eyes, those steady gray eyes, held no cruelty. She took his hand. His grip was warm and firm. He pulled her up gently, careful not to startle her. She swayed, and he steadied her with a hand on her back. "Easy," he said again. "We'll take it slow." He helped her onto his horse, then climbed up behind her. She leaned back against him, too tired to be afraid. His arm circled her waist, not tight, just enough to keep her from falling. The ride was quiet, wind in the grass, crickets, the creak of saddle leather. Zane did not speak, and neither did she. There was something peaceful about the silence. His camp was tucked in a small grove beside a shallow creek. A canvas tarp stretched between 2 trees. Bedroll, fire pit, coffee pot still warm on the embers. He helped her down and guided her to sit on a log near the fire. Then he handed her a tin plate with beans, jerky, and a chunk of bread. She stared at it, tears filling her eyes. Zane crouched beside her. "Eat. Take your time. There is more." She ate like she had never seen food before. Every bite hurt, but she kept going. Zane did not say a word, just refilled her plate when she finished. Only when she leaned back, full for the first time in days, did he speak. "You can stay here tonight. I will sleep near the horse. You take the bedroll." "Why are you helping me?" she asked. Zane looked at her for a long time, then said, "Because no one should be left starving in the dust." She stared at the fire, trying to keep her tears down, but her hands were shaking and he saw it. He reached forward slow and covered one with his. It was warm, solid. "You are safe now," he said. She believed him. That night, under a blanket of stars, Leora slept on his bedroll, the smell of coffee and wood smoke still clinging to the air. Zane sat on a rock a few feet away, rifle across his lap, keeping watch. She did not dream of the wagon leaving her behind. She dreamed of gray eyes and a voice that said she was not alone anymore. And for the first time since her mother died, she felt full. She did not know it yet, but she would never be hungry again, not with Zane Thatcher beside her. Zane didn't wake her at dawn. He let the sun climb halfway up the sky before he stirred the fire again, moving with quiet hands and long, slow motions that didn't disturb the air too much. The prairie held its breath in the mornings, and he'd learned not to break that silence unless he had to. She woke to the smell of cornmeal frying in lard and the sound of a creek murmuring over stones. Her eyes opened slow, lashes clumped from sleep, and for a moment she looked around like she wasn't sure where she was. Then her gaze landed on him kneeling by the skillet, hat tipped low and her shoulders eased. Zane gestured toward the bedroll without looking up. "There's a tin of soap and a brush down by the water if you want to wash up. I'll keep breakfast warm." Leora sat up, her hair tangled behind her ears. She didn't answer, but she stood, took the brush he'd left near a folded towel, and walked barefoot to the stream without glancing back. By the time she returned, her face was pink from the cold water and her sleeves rolled above her elbows. Her dress still hung loose on her frame, but her eyes were steadier. Zane handed her a plate without a word. She sat across from him, legs tucked beneath her, and ate with quiet focus. A meadowlark called from a cottonwood branch above, and somewhere farther west, a calf bawled for its mother. After the meal, she set her plate aside and folded her hands in her lap. "Where are you headed?" "Fort Benton," he said, cleaning the skillet with a rag. "Got a delivery for a ranch out that way. Mule team broke a wheel, so I rode ahead while the rest catch up." She nodded once, thoughtful. "Could I go with you?" His hand stilled on the pan. "You sure?" "I can't go back to Miles City," she said, "and I won't ask you for charity." "I didn't say you were. I can help cook, mend, I can work." Zane didn't answer right away. He poured water from his canteen over the tin plate, scrubbed it clean, then dried it on his knee. The fire popped once, throwing a spark into the ash. "I won't take you along if you feel like you owe me something," he said. "I don't." He looked up. Her spine was straight, chin lifted. She meant it. "All right," he said, standing. "Then we pack." She helped him break camp, rolled the bedroll tight, gathered the tinware, and folded the tarp with quick hands. She moved carefully, like her body still remembered hunger in every joint, but she didn't complain. When he offered her the saddle to mount, she took it with a nod and swung up behind him without hesitation. They rode south first, cutting across a stretch of open pasture where the grass was brittle from too much sun. Late summer heat shimmered off the ground. A jackrabbit darted from a bush and the horse snorted, but Zane kept a steady hand on the reins. "Been to Fort Benton before?" he asked after a while. "No. It's rough in spots," he said. "Riverboats come up from St. Louis, bring all kinds. Traders, gamblers, men looking to forget things." She was quiet, but her fingers tightened slightly on the saddle horn. "Don't worry," he said. "I don't drift, I stay out of the saloons." "You have family there?" "No, not anywhere." She didn't ask more. That night they camped near a stand of poplars. The air smelled of warm earth and old leaves. Zane shot a prairie chicken before the light faded and roasted it over the fire. Leora plucked it, her fingers steady now, and seasoned it with salt and dried herbs from his pouch. As they ate, she looked across the flames and said, "I never learned how to ride on my own." Zane looked up from his plate. "You want to? I think I ought to." "All right," he said. "We'll start tomorrow." She gave a small nod and returned to her meal. The firelight caught in her hair, turning it to copper in places. He didn't stare, but he noticed. Later, when she lay near the fire wrapped in a blanket, not quite asleep, she spoke again. "Was your mother kind?" Zane leaned back against his saddle. The stars were thick above, the kind that looked close enough to touch. "She tried to be," he said. "She didn't last long." Leora didn't answer, but she shifted slightly, drawing the blanket closer. He added another log to the fire, then settled in for the night. Neither of them said it, but something had shifted since the morning. It was in the way she handed him the skillet without needing to be asked, in the way he glanced back once to make sure she hadn't fallen behind. In the quiet comfort that grew between two people who had both known what it meant to be left behind and who, for the first time, weren't anymore. They rode through low hills where the soil turned ochre, and the grass grew sparse between rock outcroppings. The horse moved slow to conserve strength, and Leora sat straighter now, her hands resting against the horn as Zane guided with a light pull of the reins. She had begun to read the land, her eyes tracking the lay of shade and the lean of the wind. By the fourth day of travel, the trail grew narrow, pinched between a ridgeline and a dry creek. A rusted wagon wheel lay half buried in the sand like a warning. Zane slowed the horse and scanned the slope above. "Stay alert," he said quietly. They passed without trouble, but Leora turned in the saddle to glance back once the path widened again. "You've seen trouble here before." "Once. A man lost his mule to a bullet and never saw who fired it." She didn't ask more, and he didn't offer anything further. That evening, after the fire was lit and the horse tethered to a juniper branch, Zane took out a thin leather pouch and unwrapped a harmonica. He didn't play it, just turned it over in his hands, thumb brushing the worn brass edge. Leora watched from across the fire, knees drawn up beneath her skirt. "You play." "Only when I can't sleep." "Why not tonight?" He looked at her, then set it to his lips and blew a low, slow tune. Nothing fancy, just a line of melody that drifted like smoke into the dark. She listened without moving. When he stopped, she didn't speak for a long time. "I think my mother would have liked that." Zane folded the harmonica back into its pouch. "She play anything," she sang, Leora said, "but only when she brushed my hair. Said songs were like prayers you could hear." Zane nodded once, then tossed a stick into the flames. The next morning he brought a second horse up from the ravine where he'd hobbled it, smaller, with a dappled coat and a quiet temperament. Leora's eyes widened. "She's not fast," Zane said, handing her the reins, "but she's steady. You'll learn on her." Leora stepped closer, running a hand down the mare's neck. "What's her name?" "Didn't give her one. She came with a group I drove up from the southern border last spring." She led the mare in a wide circle, mimicking what she'd seen Zane do. He watched her posture, the way her feet moved with the animal. When she stopped, he nodded. "You're ready to mount." It took effort. Twice her boot slipped from the stirrup, but she bit her lip and tried again. On the third try, she swung her leg over and settled into the saddle. Zane adjusted the cinch and stepped back. "Keep your hands low. Let her feel you, not fight you." They rode side by side along the creek for half the day. Leora's legs ached, and her knuckles whitened now and then, but she didn't fall. When they stopped to water the horses, she leaned against a boulder and exhaled. "I didn't think I could do it." "You did," Zane said, "and you'll do more tomorrow." That night, as she stirred beans in the pan, she asked without looking up, "Why'd you stay a cowboy?" He leaned against a pine trunk. "Didn't see myself fit for anything else." "You could have run a store. Or worked for the telegraph. Too many walls in town, too many rules that don't make sense." Leora nodded, scraping the pan clean. "You ever miss it, though? A roof, a door that locks." "Sometimes," he said, "but not lately." She looked up then, and he held her gaze longer than he had before. The silence between them deepened, not empty but full of something unspoken and steady. She handed him a plate, and their fingers brushed. Neither of them moved away. By the time they crossed into the Teton River Valley, summer had begun its slow unraveling. The cottonwoods along the banks were tinged with yellow, and the wind had a sharper edge. Zane kept the horses at a steady pace, eyes always on the ridgelines, while Leora rode beside him, her posture straighter than it had been days ago. They passed a trapper's lean-to, long abandoned, and a rusted kettle half buried in the tall grass. A pair of crows followed them for a while, calling out to one another as they circled above. That evening they made camp near a stand of willows where the water ran cold and clear. Zane built the fire low, using dry pine needles and small branches, and Leora brought down their bedrolls without needing to be asked. As she laid the blankets out, she glanced over her shoulder. "You ever stay put anywhere?" For more than a season, Zane set the coffee tin on a flat stone near the fire. "Once, north of Cheyenne, thought I'd try my hand at fence work. And didn't suit me. Too many men trying to be loud to make up for what they lacked." Leora pulled her shawl tighter. "I used to think staying meant safety, but maybe safety's not always the same thing as peace." Zane looked across the fire. "Where would peace be for you?" She didn't answer right away. The fire cracked softly beneath the pot. "I don't know yet," she said finally. "But I think maybe it's found more in who's beside you than where your boots land." Zane's gaze lingered on her face, the lines of it drawn sharper in the firelight. He didn't speak, but he nodded once, slow. The next morning they reached a fork in the trail. One path ran along the high ridge, the other cut through low canyons. Shaded but winding, Zane reined in. "We'll take the ridge. Less cover, but I don't trust narrow passes this far west." Leora didn't question it. She adjusted her saddlebag and followed. Half a day later, just past a dry bluff where the bones of an old cow lay bleached and scattered, they met a rider coming the other way. He wore a battered Union coat and had a rifle slung across his back. His horse was thin, ribs showing. Zane pulled his mount to a halt and raised a hand. "Trail's clear behind us." The man nodded, eyes flicking to Leora. "Fort Benton's still standing, last I saw," Zane said. "You headed there, maybe, looking for work, or something like it." "Plenty of wagons still need guards," Zane said. "If you've got a sharp aim." The man tapped his rifle once, then nudged his horse forward without another word. They watched him ride off, dust trailing behind. Leora waited until he was out of earshot before speaking. "You always that generous with passing strangers?" Zane kept his eyes on the trail. "No, but not everyone lies with ease. You could tell." He didn't flinch when he saw the rifle on my saddle. "Men who mean harm usually do." That night the sky clouded over. No stars. Just the low hush of wind through dry grass. They ate their meal in silence, both listening to the distant call of coyotes. Afterward, Zane poured the last of the coffee and handed her the tin. "We'll reach the outskirts of Benton by midday tomorrow," he said. Leora looked down into the cup. "And then, that's up to you." She drew in a breath, the steam warming her face. "I don't want to part ways." Zane didn't look away. "I wasn't planning to." She gave a small nod, eyes steady. When the fire burned low, she stood and crossed the space between them, slow and certain. She didn't touch him, not yet. Just stood close enough that the warmth from his skin reached hers. "You said I'd never be left to starve again," she said. "Did you mean it?" Zane rose, his face unreadable in the dim light. "I meant every word." She reached for his hand and he let her take it. No other promises were spoken. None needed to be. They lay beside one another beneath the canvas sky, the blanket pulled over both shoulders, the fire breathing low and steady at their feet. She slept with her head near his collarbone, and he kept an arm around her without waking. And though the night was colder than any they'd shared, neither of them felt it. The wind carried the scent of smoke and river water as Fort Benton came into view beneath a pale morning sky. The Missouri shimmered to the east, swollen from late summer rains, and the town rose low and wide from its banks wood-planked storefronts. Canvas tents stretched between wagons, and the tall spire of the Catholic mission catching the light like a silver needle. Zane kept his horse to a measured pace as they approached, Leora beside him on the dappled mare. Her shoulders were squared, and her hands stayed easy on the reins, though her eyes moved constantly, taking in the paddle boat docked at the levee, the freight wagon stacked with flour barrels, the cluster of children chasing a runaway dog near the livery. They passed beneath a weathered archway where a man in a bowler hat called out tally marks to a passing mule train. A group of Assiniboine women bartered with a trader near the mercantile, beadwork and smoked hides exchanged for bolts of calico. Zane tipped his hat but didn't slow. They stopped outside a supply depot near the edge of town. A man in a red neckerchief emerged from the doorway, wiping his hands on his vest. "Thatcher," he called. "You made it." Zane dismounted. "Wagon's 2 days behind. Axle cracked outside Judith Basin." "I rode ahead to settle your order." The man nodded, then squinted at Leora. "You riding with him?" She dismounted with quiet control, landing steady. "I am." He gave her a curt nod and disappeared back inside. Zane led the horses around back to a fenced paddock. Leora followed, her boots stirring dust as they walked. "What now?" she asked. Zane unsaddled his gelding and set the blanket over the rail. "I'll need to finish the delivery once the wagon arrives. Should be 2 days' work." She traced a finger along the mare's mane. "And after?" He looked at her across the space between. "You still want to ride beside me?" She stepped forward. "I didn't come this far to watch you leave." Zane's mouth tightened, not in doubt, but in something close to wonder. He reached for her hand and held it between both of his. "There's land west of here," he said. "Beyond the Marias River, quiet, fertile. A man could build a place there, a woman too." Leora's eyes didn't waver. "I can sow and plant. I can raise hens. I can build walls and dig a well." She lifted her free hand to his chest, heart steady beneath her palm. "Then let's make a life." They spent the next 2 days in town. Zane repaired tack for the depot, while Leora found work mending shirts at the outfitter's corner stall. She bartered for a new pair of boots properly fitted and a straw hat with a faded blue ribbon. They ate their meals beneath the porch awning of the boarding house, and at night she slept beside him in the wagon bay, the scent of hay and iron lulling her to rest. When the freight team arrived, Zane helped unload the crates and settled the account with the depot manager. He returned to Leora with half his pay in coin and the other half in tools: an axe head, a hand saw, and a square of window glass wrapped in burlap. They left Fort Benton before sunrise, the wagon heavier now with seed, flour, and a small iron stove tied down with rawhide straps. They followed the river west, cutting through cottonwood groves and low valleys where elk prints dotted the mud. On the 5th morning, they reached the base of a sloping hill where wild chokecherries grew thick along the creek bank. Zane stopped the wagon there. "This is it." Leora stepped down and walked the length of the clearing. The soil was dark and damp beneath her boots. The creek bent gently, curving around the base of the hill like a protective arm. She turned to him. "It feels right." They built slow. First the frame, then the walls, chinking the gaps with clay and straw. Leora planted onions near the creek and hung herbs from the rafters to dry. Zane dug a root cellar and taught her how to fire a rifle in case of wolves. They worked side by side, not speaking much during the day, too much to do, but at night they sat on the cabin step with mugs of chicory and watched the moon rise over the slope. One evening, as the first frost settled on the grass, Zane took her hand in his and said, "I've known the kind of loneliness that eats through a man, but I don't remember it anymore. Not with you here." She rested her head against his shoulder. "I used to think belonging was something given to you. But now I know it's something you build." In the spring, they added a small corral. A neighbor from upriver traded them 2 hens for a bolt of muslin. Leora made curtains, and Zane carved a cradle even though neither of them spoke the reason aloud. But when the child came the following winter, a boy, red-faced and loud as thunder, they named him Illy, after the only preacher either of them had ever trusted. Zane held him close that first night, and Leora watched from the bed, her face pale with joy and exhaustion. "He's got your steadiness," she whispered. Zane kissed her forehead. "He's got his mother's strength." They raised him in the rhythm of the land, planting, mending, fixing what broke and building what they lacked. They never spoke much about the road that brought them together. There was no need. It lived in the quiet between them, in the way she pressed his collar flat before supper, and the way he set her coffee beside the bed each morning. Years passed, and the cabin grew with them. But every night, long after the fire died down, Zane would draw Leora close beneath the quilt she'd pieced in their first year, and she would rest her hand over his heart, steady as the beat of the land itself. And there, in the soft hush of a life built together, they found the kind of peace that never needed to be spoken to be known.